Welcome, welcome, and thank you for being here for our first ever CTA REACT Equity Team Take Back Tuesday for Racial and Social Justice. Thank you for being here. It is summer vacation. We have been on meeting after meeting after meeting, and we know that this one matters to us, and we are so grateful that it matters to you too. So from the bottom of my heart and from everybody who helped plan this, and on behalf of the REACT team, the equity teams, and CTA, thank you for being here with us at our first ever Take Back Tuesday. I'm Angela de Ramos. I am a 5th grade teacher in Salinas, California. Salinas is the land of the Salinans. And so I'd like to take this moment to invite you to thank the people on whose land you stand as the first people and the indigenous people of the lands on who we sit. So I honor and acknowledge the Salinan tribe who gave us this space to do this work in. So there are 1,500 of you, or some count as at last count. And so there will not be time to discuss. So let me go over the format for today. The format is going to be our panelist will engage us in a conversation moderated by Sarah Robinson, my colleague at arms in the at-large representational position in CTA. So she will take over the moderation for our panel of fabulous guests who are educators like you and me, who are doing the work of racial and social justice in their classrooms, in their community, in their locals and beyond. So they're going to have a conversation about being an anti-racist educator in the classroom. But we encourage you to keep on with these conversations. So in this format of WebEx, we do not have a chat function, but we do have Q&A. Those will be moderated by a team of our fellow at-large and REACT members and leaders. And they are paying attention to the questions that are important to you. So if there are questions that you have for the panelists or for CTA about resources or how to engage in this work, please ask in the Q&A, and a moderator will be there to read and appreciate and find a place for your questions and answers and comments that will move us forward, because this work does not end here. So I'm going to invite you to take a step back, take a nice deep breath and ground in with me, and think about this in terms of what action you will take. Because none of this matters if we don't vow to take some action after that. And that action is going to depend on you. So come prepared with questions, come prepared with inquiry, and come prepared to be uncomfortable. And if you are uncomfortable, I'm going to invite you to sit with that discomfort, because this work is not easy. Racism is ugly and hurtful, and getting out of it might be too. But sit with it, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable, but vow to do some work. If that work is internal, that is part of being an anti-racist. So with that, I'm going to take a nice deep breath, and we're going to ground to the moment. I'd like you to think about your commitment to action and listen with that intent. And we'll take a nice deep breath in. And with that, I'm going to add another piece of information. You will get resources and contacts at the end of this presentation and emailed to you. We have your emails. So the conversation and the action doesn't have to be alone. You've got CTA, you've got all the resources, you've got all of us. The contact of your friendly neighborhood social justice person for CTA is your at-large. You all have will be pushed out to you. Sarah and I are available, any of the panelists, they're all CTA, they're educators like you. So there will be contacts and resources, and so look forward to that. And with that, think about what you promised to do. Think about listening with open ears. And I'm going to pass it on to Sarah, my co-moderator for the night.
Thank you, Angela. What a great introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as Angela mentioned, we are teaming up here between our REACT team and also our Equity at Large members to have this conversation about anti-racist education and anti-racism. And with the full acknowledgement that all of us here are at a different place on that journey towards being anti-racist. And we wanted to give people a starting point to encourage those who have already started the journey and to support those who are already far along in that journey. So we've collected 4 amazing speakers for you today to share their experiences, their perspectives, to give you ideas and motivation and give you that strength to begin or continue this journey for yourself, your students, your community, your local association. If you could go to the next slide, please. And again, this is kind of just a summary what we're doing. You can go to the next one. And I want to introduce our panelists. So first up, we have Dr. Tamisha Brame Carter, who is the chair of our CTA African American Caucus. She is a REACT member. She is the president of the Centinela Valley Secondary Teachers Association, and she is a high school physical education teacher. Next, we have Tanya Jaco, who is an NEA board member. She is the secretary for the NEA Black Caucus, and she is a middle school social studies teacher. Next is Erica Jones, who is one of our CTA board members for District J. She is also a member of the California Department of Education Task Force on Reopening Schools, and she is an elementary school teacher. And our 4th panelist is Cecily Meyer Cruz. She is the president-elect of UTLA. She is the chair of the NEA Black Caucus, and she is an elementary teacher. As Angela mentioned, my name is Sarah Robinson. I am a minority at large for the Bay Valley Service Center. I am a high school Spanish teacher in the Redondo Beach Teachers Association. So welcome to all of our panelists. And I'd like to just get started with our questions. And kind of the first one for you is our most broad. When you hear the phrase an anti-racist or an anti-racist educator, what does that mean to you? And jump in whoever wants to speak first.
All right, well, I'm jumping in. Good evening, everyone. Good to be here. Thank you so much for putting this together. I think one of the things that I really think about in living my life as an anti-racist is that I'm actively trying to dismantle systemic racism, that I kind of live that and breathe that. And I also have a deep understanding that the white supremacy culture that is foundational in our country is also foundational in all the systems that we have within our country, including the public school system. So just acknowledging that and then obviously actively trying to dismantle it.
Yeah, I'll echo that as well. And again, thank you for putting this together. When I think about being anti-racist, I have to think about also my first experience and my first memory of racism. You know, I was 6 years old the first time I was called a nigger, and I didn't even know what it was. You know, I was playing with my white friend and, you know, you start calling names back and forth, and that was the name that she used. And I didn't know what it meant, but I know that she didn't mean it to be nice, you know, and as a 6-year-old, my response was, no, I'm not, you are, right? But then I went home and had to tell and ask my white mother, what does this mean? And she had to have a conversation with me where she sat me down at 6 and said, sweetie, first of all, you're a girl. And unfortunately, people don't think that girls can do the same things as boys. You are Black. And unfortunately, people don't think that Black people can do the same things as white people. And you are going to have to work twice as hard in your life just for people to see you as equal. Now, that conversation we had at 6 years old, and that's heavy, but I knew in that moment that that was wrong. right? And so I knew in that moment, and my original thought and intent was I was going to become an attorney because I was going to fight the man, and I was going to fight for justice and liberation for women and minorities and young people. Like that was my heart at 6 years old, just in that experience. So for me, anti-racist, first of all, if you look it up, it's going to give you a noun or an adjective, right? But to me, I would put the case that it's also a verb. It's what you do. It's how you live your life, and it's a life's work. It is a commitment to actively think critically and push back against the systems and the status quo, to say, why are things this way? And then to be willing to take action to push back on them.
Yeah, I'll echo both my sisters here, Erica and Tanya, to say, like, I mean, when we say dismantling the systems and structures, like, we actually mean it, that we have to be disruptors of the status quo. And as educators, I think it is our duty to do this work. That's why I was called into this work at an early age. You know, Tanya gave that story, and my story is along the same lines, except I remember I was 4 when that happened to me. And, you know, it is the right thing to do, to constantly be checking ourselves, constantly to check and call in folks into this fight. You know, with the uprisings that have been going on, like, now is the time for us to actually break the real system, break this system to its very core, because what is at stake are our students' lives. And if we only are in our classrooms and we just do, you know, we say, oh, politics are not in my classroom, I'm going to challenge every single educator to say, you have a responsibility to break the system and cycle for our babies. This is the time to do that. And teaching is a revolutionary act. So let us start the revolution that the students are already starting right now. We've got to do that for them, because there's no other way to get this in. To be an anti-racist educator, we've got to be about the full liberation of every single student.
Thank you, Cecily. Tamisha, is there something else you wanted to add of what being an anti-racist means to you?
Absolutely. For me, it's being unapologetic every single day. And like Cecily and my sister said, challenging every part of these oppressive systems every single day at every single moment. And for me, unfortunately, it's a constant and daily challenge. Every there's the microaggressions and there's the macroaggressions, and every aspect has to be challenged. So it's an opportunity for all of us to engage. And like Cecily said, our students are leading this fight. So if we're afraid as educators, as adults who have had these experiences all of our lives, all we have to do is look at our students who are challenging the status quo every single day, and we can mirror. All we have to do is mirror what they're doing. And for me, is supporting my students in the classroom. They have so many questions. They have so many not so good experiences. And it's up to us as educators to, one, validate those experiences and call out those experiences for exactly what they are, and then challenge those folks who are dishing out these experiences. So every day experience an opportunity to make change.
Thank you. For those people maybe who are newer to this work or newer to this journey, they might hear the phrase anti-racism, anti-racist, and say, well, you know, I'm not racist. Can you speak to a little bit about why saying or being not racist is not an option, why it's not enough, why it's not the same as being anti-racist? I'll choose. Erica, would you like to comment on that?
Sure, we're also polite, like waiting and deferring. I think this kind of goes back to what Tanya was saying, right? Like actively being anti-racist, right? Like thinking about that as a verb. So understanding and then coupling that with understanding that systemic racism is a foundation of this country. So it's not actually enough to say you're not racist. It's not. That's an easy thing to say. Like I could say, oh yeah, I'm not racist. A lot of times that's followed with, I have a Black friend, which of course is then really going back to showing that you're actually not understanding what systemic racism means and your active role in dismantling that. So I really look at being an anti-racist as like, it's a call to action. What are you doing today to dismantle systemic racism? What are you doing today? Because it's so much deeper than just saying, I'm not racist. You know, I was raised to not see color, right? We hear this a lot.
I'm colorblind.
Right, exactly. I'm colorblind. Like what you're telling me in that phrase is that you're actually not accepting that there is systemic racism and systemic oppression. Because even with that, you're not understanding that I actually, in order to be anti-racist, you have to see my race. You actually have to see it. You have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge the system, and you have to acknowledge that we have much work to do collectively.
Anya?
Continuing with that, yes, continuing with that, it's not you're either racist or you're anti-racist, right? There's no space in the middle where you're just neutral, right? Where you're just kind of like you're not a fan in the stand and watching this game play out. You are contributing in some way, and you have to ask yourself that if you are not actively being anti-racist, then ask yourself, in which ways are you helping to contribute and perpetuate systemic racism? That's what you have to see, right? You have to understand that there is this system that's working, and you're either helping it to work or you're helping to dismantle it. It's one or the other. There's not this safe space, right, of I'm just going to stay here and wait for all this to blow over. That's not how this works. And so at this moment, if you are finding yourself in that place of, well, I'm not racist, that means you're probably helping perpetuate systemic racism. And you need to stay right there in that space and start to interrogate your own ideas, your own thoughts, your own opinions. If you're not comfortable with talking about race, why? Why are you not comfortable with talking about race? You know, if you've never had to talk about race, let's pause right there. I was 6 years old when I was made acutely aware that the world is going to see me differently simply because of the color of my skin. So if you've never had to have those conversations, then you need to recognize that that's because there is this system that protects you and allows you and affords you the opportunity and the privilege to not have to see that if you don't want to. And now you're in this place, and I believe that the truth is what will set you free. You need to be honest with yourself and honest about what has transpired, so that you can not only liberate your own mind, but then you can start to take an active role to liberate others.
Cecily or Tamisha? Let's go to Tamisha. What have you got to add?
I think of it as a game of tag. And when my brothers and I were younger and we played tag, no one wanted to be it. So we would all run around screaming, not it, not it, not it. This is not one of those instances. We are all it. We all have to do the work. We all have to engage. And one of the biggest thing that I'm seeing now on social media is silence. We are not at the movies where silence is golden. we all have to engage. So like Tanya said, if you are comfortable with saying, I'm not it, then you are probably most likely, actually definitely part of the problem. So we have to engage.
Cecily?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what all the speakers have said. And I think, you know, a big part of it, when people are saying, I don't see race, I'm colorblind. I have one Black friend. What do you mean? I love Oprah, right? But then the question that I would say, you know, and especially being a middle school teacher as well, who am I seeing in the office time and time again? Okay. Mostly Black students that are thrown out of classrooms because they didn't have a paper or a pencil or had a do-rag on or a hoodie. So like Tanya just said, interrogate that. We want to interrogate why. And we have to say, I don't care how a child comes into my classroom, as long as they're wanting and willing to engage in the learning process, I want them there. Now, we've all had instances, and I know Erica can tell a story. We have plenty of stories that we can tell where students have gone off. But the point that I want to make is that you got to get to the core root of what happened to that baby that set that baby off. Was it walking to school and being targeted by the police? And then coming into the school and then being targeted by school police? And then coming into a classroom where the student, maybe the educator didn't have their coffee today. And then you see them and it's I'm going back and forth. We got to halt that, because that baby needs some love and some attention. There are many times in my career of 25 years that I dropped my lesson plans like that because something was going on with my student and it was going to affect our community that we built. So damn the lesson plan. Lesson plan went out the window, and we all had to get into a circle so that we can not only find out what was the root cause, but we needed to love on this baby right here. And that is the reason why you build that community. You've got to. As white educators, it is incumbent, if you're working in a community of people of color and especially Black students, you owe it to the Black students to find out what's happening with them. That is a part of this work, and saying you don't have all the answers. If we just tell the babies that, they will understand. You got to be honest and say, I don't know. But I tell you what, when we are as elementary teachers or middle school or high school, if we're only teaching about MLK and Rosa Parks during Black History Month, you're not getting it. At September, when Native American Month comes through around, or November around Thanksgiving, and you still are dividing up half of your class as pilgrims and the other as indigenous people with pilgrim hats, you're not getting it. Carson DeLosa, all of those, Pearson, all of that, we've got to decolonize the curriculum. We need ethnic studies. There are so many levels to this. It's like peeling an onion. So the point is, are you going to be the skin on top of the onion, or are you going to get to start the blooming of the onion? That's what we need. As educators, this is your job. This is our job together to do this work. We've got to do it for our students.
Thank you, Cecily. One of the things Cecily mentioned about the students, our Black students being suspended or in the office more often, I'm going to quote some from Dr. Kendi's book on how to be an anti-racist, but he tells us that that if you're an anti-racist, you recognize that there is no such thing as racial behavior. So then you look at a statistic that says Black students are 4 times more likely to be suspended than white students. And you have to then look at it and say, well, if these kids are just individuals and they're acting in their way, why is this group so much more targeted for these negative consequences? And so the anti-racist then has to look at those policies that are in place that are discriminating against these different groups. That's what we mean when we're saying you can't just say, well, I'm not racist, I think all these kids are great. No, the anti-racist takes it a step further and says, wait a minute, why are these kids being punished? Why are these kids being referred more often to special education? Why are these kids being pushed out of our schools, right? And then Cecily touched a little bit too on our curriculum. So that's kind of where I want to take it now. So if we're looking at the anti-racist educator who is in their classroom, their work site, or even working in their local union, their community organization, what does some of the work that either you all have participated in or things that people could be doing that is that work of anti-racism?
I can go.
Go for it.
So I think, again, going back to having everything that you do and look at it through a racial justice lens, right? And seeing every aspect of your work, from coming onto campus, how you greet students, how you set up community in your classroom, really evaluating and looking at every single piece that you do, every part of our work. Looking at how you grade, right? I have to look at, what am I grading? What am I assessing here? What am I valuing? What am I showing that I'm valuing through how I'm awarding points or not awarding points, right? And pushing back on that. I've even had to fight with some of my students because they're so conditioned to say, well, how many points is this? And how does this affect my grade? And I'm like, all right, everybody has an A. Can we just take that pressure off ourselves? Like, everybody has an A. All right, let's look at how we can, where we are and how we can grow, right? And start to kind of get rid of that that idea of that you're setting this benchmark based on performance, right? And then not also considering all of the other aspects, looking at the student holistically, right? What they're bringing into the classroom, what things can they contribute to the conversation, right? And as Cecily mentioned, setting up that community where, look, I'm not worried about the curriculum. I'll take that. That's my responsibility. Y'all don't have to worry about that. I care about us, right? And putting them at the center and letting them know that you are there for them, and making space for them, right? We study ancient civilizations in social studies, right? But as we're learning about ancient Israelites, right, I have a student who's Assyrian and wants to share her culture, right? Actually creating space for her. Like, I went to her and asked her, what would you like to share? What can you teach us? What can we learn from you? And giving her that opportunity to share her culture and share her language and share her music, right, with the rest of us that we can learn from. And I think those are moments where we as teachers can start to push back, right? And as we mentioned, during Columbus Day, right? Well, we don't do Columbus Day. Let's use that as an opportunity to think critically, right? Let's get into some argumentation, right? Let's look at Columbus Day versus Indigenous People Day. What do you think? Let's read about this. Why are we celebrating Columbus? Who is this? Should we celebrate Columbus, right? Like, asking those questions to start to engage students and pull them in to get them to start thinking critically about this. And as we're looking at whatever the curriculum may be, if you're not creating your own curriculum, because that's another thing. I look and I'm like, we're not doing that. I have something. But there are some things, if you feel like you must do, then I think engaging your students in an opportunity to think critically about what you're learning, to say, why are we learning about this? Whose story is missing? Why are we learning about this, right? And engage them in those kind of conversations. I think ways that we in our classroom and in our role as educators, which is so imperative. And I say this all the time, that no other profession comes into existence without coming through us as educators. And if we as educators are unwilling, and I say unwilling because there are people who to do it, if we are unwilling or unable to provide the structure and the framework for our students to engage in these critical conversations and talk about race and identity, then how in the world are we supposed to expect anyone else in the world to be able to do it? Right? It starts with us. When we're looking at the uprisings that are happening, this is a moment of reflection for education to say, what is our role in this? Where did we fall short? What did we not do? And what do we need to start actively doing differently right now? Actually, not right now, like yesterday. What do we need to do like yesterday? And so I think those are just a few ways that we can start to become anti-racist as teachers in the classroom.
And I think it's key that none of the things that Tanya mentioned, you don't need to have the term multicultural in the title of your course to be able to teach those things. That can be put in any course, any level. You know, that is our job as the educators to figure out how it works with our population, but that those ideas should be in all of our classrooms or work sites or offices or wherever we're at a school site.
Yeah,
I think it's important. I'm sorry. I think it's important that we not pretend that race isn't a issue in our society. I think it's imperative that we are honest with our students. And for those of us who teach in areas where there are tons of people of color and there are tons of police on every corner, we should be honest with those students in regards to the reasons why. And we shouldn't encourage them to move out to live in a better place. We should tackle those issues. We should actually challenge those systems. And again, as educators, we are in a very peculiar place. Like, we are representatives of the California Teachers Association, and we know that the curriculum that we teach our students does not align with the values that we should have as a society. So where do we start tackling these concerns? For me, at the high school level, I am unteaching things that these students have been taught from every grade level up until the 9th and 10th grade. The same at home. I shouldn't have to unpack what an educator, my colleagues have incorrectly informed my children on. So again, as the feeders of students in their brain capacity and their knowledge, we have to take on the challenge of being correct, accurate in the delivery of instruction as well as the content.
So just jumping in on that, I think one of the things as educators we need to realize is that we as educators actually need to unlearn things. Many of us, and all of us, granted, when you're talking about something that's systemic, that means that it was actually, for the most part of our lives, probably even unknown, might have even felt natural to us. To where then when we are now in the position of teacher or educator on a campus, we are then perpetuating the cycles that actually maintain the status quo and maintain the system of oppression. So it is also on us, the onus is on us to unlearn, right? And then also to actively seek out new education so we can then add to our own pedagogy, right? Curriculum that will not harm children. And I think that's the part that is so personal as a Black teacher who was a Black student who was harmed by the curriculum. And you could talk to probably any Black teacher in the United States who was harmed by curriculum, who learned either consciously or unconsciously our position in this nation as lower than, right? And I think when we're looking at this, one of the things I often think about as far as, where is your activism? education in itself is a form of activism. Thinking back to when it was illegal to teach a Black person how to read or write. It was illegal to do that. And then if you go into then the public school system was basically set up not for Black success. It was not. It was actually set up for Black failure. And is the system continuing to do what it was set up to do? So when we're talking about being an anti-racist educator, and I think this is why, you know, it is such a critical fight right now, and why these uprisings have, to me, are really showing a sign of hope, because we are here right now having this conversation as educators, right? We are here right now as CTA prioritizing this conversation. And I think we have a lot of work to do, but what we need is for educators to actually come to the table and just admit that they don't know, and that's okay, but they need to learn. And one of the things, I've told this story often, I actually didn't really learn the true story about Rosa Parks until college. I thought, I grew up in Kentucky, right? Went to school in Kentucky, and then I moved out to Los Angeles in 8th grade. And by that point, you know, the February MLK and Rosa Parks celebrations had kind of stopped by the time you got to junior high. But I had always thought that she was older and she was tired and she just needed to sit down. And last year, I walked the footsteps of how that Montgomery boycott started, right? And how they were activists and organizers. And like, this was not just a person who was one older and tired who wanted to sit down. And I looked through my Scholastic books in my classroom, right? And there it is, right there, Rosa Parks with gray hair. And she's tired and she's sitting down. And I remember having to like seek out other, you know, I taught kindergarten, I had to seek out other books that really actually told the true story of Rosa Parks. And I had asked my kids, I showed them both, what do you think about this? Let's have this conversation, you know, and I'm looking out at basically a class full of majority Black faces. And I'm looking out at my young, you know, students, and I'm asking them, and one of my students said, if they told us the truth, then we would know our power. And the fact that at 5, and this goes back to what Tanya was saying at 6, right? All of us can tell you when it was we first knew what our position in this nation was. And if you have not gone through that and you are an educator, it is your duty. It is your duty to understand that perspective, learn that perspective, and then figure out ways to dismantle it. It is on you.
Well, yeah, what Erica says is very true, and what folks, I want to add to the space that in California Teachers Association, we have roughly 306,000 teachers, educators in California. Only 12,000 of those teachers, 12,000 are Black teachers. Of that, there are only 3,700 that are Black male teachers. Okay, so I want to juxtapose that with how much do we contribute to the school to prison pipeline? Well, we per pupil, 65,000 goes to funding a prisoner, a youth as a prisoner, as compared to 11,500 to fund a pupil. Now, I want to say that in that context, that the priorities are upside down. They're upside down. And so when you are balancing the budget on the backs of children, and you are saying, well, if the rates of Black students are so low within the school system, then what are we really teaching? Like I always say, like, if we can make sure that Black people are free, everybody will be free. Like people have a hard time when they're like, Black lives matter. Oh, well, but other lives matter too. Like, no, stop, full stop, period. Black lives matter. It doesn't mean your life doesn't matter. It's not a discount. This is not the oppression Olympics. What it is, though, is saying these lives right now are being targeted. And how do we do that? It goes again back to systems and policies and structures. So I want to offer this to all the elementary school teachers on this call. It is your duty to do this work for our kids. How many of you get your cumes every year as you start the year? You get those cumes, and do you actually read all of the information? I bet you do. Most of you do. Read all the information before you meet those kids. I want to challenge you not to read that. I never read the cumes because someone else had an issue, maybe, with those kids. I did not read those cumes because I didn't want those labels on my babies. I never did. So that's exactly what I'm challenging you to do. Don't put labels. And at the end of the year, you read those cumes, and I guarantee you, you're going to think differently. We have to challenge systems and practices, things that we've done all the time. Change it. Change it. We say that we are the catalyst for change. Change is hard, but it's growth. And our kids are depending on you. Our kids are depending on you to go the extra mile to undo the systematic racism, undo the systems that hold our kids down, and really start to uplift and affirm who they are. And like Tanya said, like, dig in to the critical conversations. Have those critical conversations. Your students are up to it. They see what's going on. Affirm where they are, and let's lead. See their humanity.
Thank you, Cecily. We're about ready to move into our Q&A, but before we get there, I just wanted to build a little bit what Cecily just talked about in being courageous. These are difficult conversations to start. It's never an easy place to start on your journey to be an anti-racist, but again, in the words of Dr. Kendi, he tells us we don't have to be fearless like Harriet Tubman to be anti-racist. You just have to be courageous to be an anti-racist. And courage is the strength to do what's right, even in the face of fear or opposition. So even if you feel uncomfortable having that conversation, like Tanya mentioned earlier, good. You need to sit in that uncomfort and push through it, because when you have something that is sewn into the fabric of our country like racism, we can't expect to undo it without feeling pain. But it's through pushing through that pain that we will be able to, build these systems that are anti-racist. So with that, I'm going to bring back Angela. So she has been monitoring bravely our Q&A and bring forth some of these gems that you have for our esteemed panelists.
Okay, and there were so many. I want to give a shout out to everybody there are some rich questions. So I got to moderate the virtual world, and I want to give a shout out to my fellow at-larges and advocates and educators in the room doing the work behind the scenes. You know who you are. Give yourselves a pat on the back, because they've been moderating these chats, because this takes all of us. So your voices, your questions, your next step, and we don't wait for people to come and give us the answer. Doing the work means you read, you seek out those answers. No one's going to give you this work. No one's going to make the map for you, because we're building it as we go, because we haven't been there yet, but we're getting there. So you kind of have to make it up. We're all treading water. So I'm going to remember, if you don't know, you're left with more questions than you came with. That is good. That is a sign of you are growing, you are learning, you are inquisitive. So I'm going to invoke the teacher in me and say, flip this, because Doing the work means now that you go get resources, you put the questions out in the universe, you've formed your question, that's your inquiry piece. Now you're going to get an email that gives you resources, the people to contact, the books to read, the articles we suggest. I'm going to invite you to post and start reading comments online in our CTA pages. We have a Black Lives Matter page available on the CTA website. We've got resources on how to teach this. So I'm going to get right to the questions because a lot of the questions I saw were around conditions in our classroom. Where to start, what does it look like, lessons, how do we talk to kids, how do we talk to colleagues? So it's conditions of learning both for our kids and ourselves. About content itself, what's okay, what if I make a mistake, can I use this book? And then community, and by community I mean everything about community, our classrooms, about civic, about the communities of practice, about what if it gets political, so all that sort of civics and community and where we mush all those together. So what I think I'm going to do is invite, kind of mush those things. The number one question from like most people are, what does it look like and sound like in your classroom? So I think, can we do a collective question and maybe a flash round to everybody to say, what does it look like? Because that was like, give them an example of a lesson, a book, a topic, a dialogue that comes from your grade level, because they were very like, I teach English, I do math. This is like, people want to infuse. So I think, would that work for everybody? Flash round questions. So it's, what does it look like or sound like in your classroom at your grade level that you all have experiences? Because I want to remind everyone, these are all educators from the classroom who work with children. And if it's not happening in the kids' world, then we play the long game here. So flash round question. What do you do as a teacher? Go.
In my classroom, because I'm a PE teacher, I'm usually getting access to educational resources for my students who other educators believe are not capable. So it's access to the AP classes, access to SAT prep, access to AVID, access to all those great things that we have as resources. And usually it entails knocking on one of my colleagues' doors and ensuring that these students are worthy of these opportunities, sadly.
Well, I would that, consider what we ask our students to do on any given day, right? Which is to come into a space, to be uncomfortable, to try something new, to be okay with failing and making mistakes in front of their peers and in front of the adult in the room. And we as educators have to remember, or we should be in this business because we want to model what it looks like to be a lifelong learner. And if we are not willing to do what we're asking and expecting our students to do, then we need to reconsider if this is the profession for us, right? You have to ask yourself that question. And so what does it look like? What does it sound like? Well, first of all, it's not super structured, right? And you're starting with inquiry, and we're not looking for perfection. We're trying to learn, right? So that can be messy. That can be very unorganized. That can be very unorthodox, right? But we can't be afraid of that, right? If you consider just what you do on any given day, and I tell my students, if I don't know something, you know what I do? I look it up. I start asking questions. I start looking to my peers and seeing if they can help me, right? It's teaching this process of how we learn and not just focused on what we're learning. Right? I don't consider myself to be the expert necessarily in the room, right? Just like I mentioned earlier, one of my students wanted to share her culture with us. I'm not an expert on Assyrian culture, right? But I do have the ability to create that space and engage students in a conversation and get us to start asking and learning how to ask open-ended questions, to lead with empathy, to have compassion, to be considerate, right? We're teaching those things, and it doesn't change for us as adults. When we graduate from school, we finish school, we still are learning. And so that is what the focus is. We should be modeling what it looks like to be a lifelong learner, don't be afraid to make mistakes, that we should embrace the mistakes and we can learn from each other, and model that for your students, and focus on the community that you're building and how you solve problems together, how you inquire, and how you work through them to find solutions for whatever challenges come up in the classroom.
I'll go. Then you go. But just from an elementary perspective, and mainly primary, understanding the fact that I am a Black teacher standing in front of kindergartners, just that is actually revolutionary. The fact that they are starting off their school career with a Black teacher. The other thing is, I am very, very careful about what I'm reading when I'm doing read alouds and how I am taking apart standards in my classroom. For example, I've done a whole unit on trickster tales that actually brings in the African diaspora and the history, and I make sure that I'm actually really, again, learning myself, right? Because I wasn't necessarily taught this way, but also making sure that I am bringing the beauty of that. The other thing is, with the little ones, I can't be afraid to talk about skin color. I can't be afraid to do it. So we do it. And we have multicultural crayons, and we talk about our images and our identities, and how, different, from coloring to everything else to writing. But my goal is that my students, regardless of what they look like, leave with self-esteem, knowing that they are worthy and they are loved and they are beautiful. So I take that very seriously, and I embed that throughout my curriculum. One of the things that I know when I taught upper grades really was not just taking a list of like multicultural books and then reading them. You have to actually read the books ahead of time and look at how are the characters in that book helping to either dismantle racism, or how are they actually perpetuating racial narratives? Because a lot of times you will pick a book that, oh, this is a Black author, this is perfect, I'm going to pick this book, but you're actually not breaking it down for your students that these are racial narratives. And this is, for example, let's think about the Black men in this book. Were they shown in a positive light? Were they not? And talk about it. Like, using those opportunities to actually talk about that, I think, is really critical. Go for it, Sess.
Yeah, I want to get in because I'm seeing a lot of questions come up, like, what if administrators push back, and I'm a science teacher, and how do I do this work? So let me just say, as long as you have your own objectives, right? You have the standards. That's how I taught. I only used my standards and the objectives and my goals. I didn't teach from any textbook. Not in my whole career, 25 years. I never taught the textbook, because the textbook, I felt, was pretty much trash, because it did not have the things that were necessary to build character with my babies. So I took my objectives, I took the standards, and then I found books intentionally that addressed those standards. So for that science teacher, or several ones, if you're not teaching about Katherine Johnson, which everybody just found out about from the movie Hidden Figures, and like, what? There were these Black women scientists. They didn't teach us that in school. You have a duty to teach that. If you don't know who Marie Maynard is, you need to be teaching her. If you're not teaching about George Washington Carver, you need to do that. So how do you bring in scientists that are culturally relevant? We've got to be about culturally relevant pedagogy, but breaking that down. As far as administrators and pushback, I'm going to push back on you all to say, you are the educators. You are the folks in the classroom. Take the initiative. If you have standards, goals, and objectives that come from Common Core, and you are having books that feed in, no administrator can touch you on that. No administrator can touch you on that. You do it, because we've got to break down this system. It is about time that we have not only a revolution in the streets, but a revolution in our classrooms. And you're the ones that can do it. So let's go ahead and let's build this up so that we do this for our students. It's about time. So take all of these resources and get out there and let's do this. And we've got to be pushing for ethnic studies, because ethnic studies is proven. I'm talking about from pre-K all the way to adult ed and higher ed. We've got to be about affirming what is for our students. We've got to be.
I mean, that's got it all right there. She put it all together. Go ahead, Angela.
And on that note, we have closing remarks from our own CTA president, Toby E. Boyd. You want to take it away, Toby?
Okay, there it goes. Thank you. Hi, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, my name is E. Toby Boyd. I am a kindergarten educator, first and foremost, and I am your CTA president. I was sitting here listening to the conversation, and I wrote down some notes. So if I look down, please forgive me. I was just trying to capture everything. But the first thing I want to say is that, it's not easy for those who have not started this journey. The journey starts with becoming awoke, and when you become woke, according to Barbara Lee, you can't go backwards. You have to understand that there's a problem, and you have to open your eyes to the injustices that are occurring with not only our Black children, but our Latinos, our Asians, and those who are less fortunate. Understanding that education wasn't made for the majority of those that were not in the dominant culture at the time. Remember, you had to be white, you had to be a male, you had to be a landowner, and you had to be Protestant. I don't know how many of you are on this right now are those, but education was not meant for you at that time. We have to understand what's in the curriculum and what's missing and should be included. Because once we do that, we have a better understanding of where we want to take our children. They have to be the priority, and they have to stay woke, because you were going to make sure that occurs. When I talked at State Council, I said the time to act is now. So I want to thank the equity team and REACT for acting and having the powerful conversations that you have for all of us. It is our job to challenge the system and break the institutional racism that is built into the system. Anti-racism is a verb. It means action. So, what are you going to do today to dismantle systematic racism? Each of us have to take this challenge every day, personally and as educators. As an anti-racist educator, there's so much and so many things that will determine what we do. There's no such thing as not having racist behaviors. We have to check ourselves, and we have to constantly remind ourselves of that, because we all slip. I'm gonna admit it right now myself. But once I do, I make sure that I pick myself up and I say, okay, I have to learn from this experience. We have to then educate our students and help them take on the challenge. Remember, I said you have to make sure they become woke, because once they understand, because they're the ones that are going to truly make this change. We're going to start it, but they're going to be the catalyst to take us over there. And that's what we have to remember, because we are just the beginning part of this. Tamisha called it a game of tag. Well, you know what, folks? We're all it. It is going to be our responsibility to make sure that we are engaged. We all have to do this work. So let's keep it moving forward. Let's keep doing the work. Having these conversations with our friends and colleagues are going to be challenging. They're not going to be easy, but they're doable. Thinking about and rethinking our lesson plans to include all of our students, not just a part of the dominant society that's in our books. We have to make sure that we go outside that, like Cecily said. You know, you have a base, but there's nothing that stops you from building upon that. So make sure that your stories are being told, regardless of who you are. And if you're white, please take in those stories that may not be yours and make them of your students, because they need to know that they're important. And that's the only way that we're going to make that happen. So that we can change the system, but we have to challenge it in order to do so. I became an educator. I wanted to be a change agent. And this is our time for all of us to be that change agent, to make sure that we have a more just society for not only us as we live in this space, but for those children and those people who are going to follow us. So thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to at least listen in on the conversation and be a part of this. I'm excited to see where this is going to go. You know, we're going to start a racial and social justice work task force that's going to truly bring in this into our association, because we need it, folks. The way that we make it is become more educated, push it out to all of our educators, and then it becomes a little easier. So again, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Toby.
Angela. Thank you. I don't know who was, that was Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for joining us. So that is taking us to the end of our time. But before we wrap up, I want to first give a huge thank you to our presenters, Dr. Tamisha Brame-Carter, Tanya Jaco, Erica Jones, Cecily Meyer-Cruz. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your passion with us. You're truly, you know, setting the pace for all of us to follow on this anti-racism journey. So thank you so much. I also want to thank our Equity Team Planning Committee, our subcommittee who kind of put this together, led by Bill Freeman, our outgoing director, and then the torch picked up by Telly C. Thank you to all of our at-larges who helped us behind the scenes. Thanks so much to our CTA staff and the Human Rights Department. And as Angela mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email that has some resources for you. It has a survey in there on if there's other topics you're interested in. Stay tuned, July 7th. We have another Take Back Tuesday planned to continue this conversation, also with our partners in REAC as well. So with that, I want to say thank you so much to everyone. And wherever you are in this journey, just keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.